every animal has their own unique soul. And so when you lose one, and it is pain, it is grief, it is loss.
Welcome to Petability. I'm your host, Kathy Simon, certified veterinary technician and certified canine rehabilitation practitioner.
And I'm your host, Chris Cranston, licensed physical therapist and small animal physical rehabilitationist.
Our podcast provides interviews and information to help your pets live their best lives.
Good afternoon, Kathy. How are you doing today?
Good afternoon, Chris. I am having a wonderful day. We just got Mac back from the groomer. He smells like lilacs and flowers. So we are ready for our podcast.
You know, I'm super excited. I don't know if you realize, but our podcast on pet grief that's titled Believing and Grieving with licensed mental health counselor Lori Levine is the most shared podcast of the over 100 that we've published to date on Petability. You know, there is a legitimate lack of resources out there for folks that are grieving their pets and so many emotions that go with it. So when Erika Sinner, who is today's guest, reached out, I was thrilled because I was just talking to my partner about we need to have another show that focuses on this topic.
I'm excited to sort of see in veterinary medicine, since I've been in it for so long now, I've been a technician for about 35 years, the shifting paradigm, right? In the way that we approach people and their animals. And even the terminology is changing within veterinary medicine from owner to caregiver. And I think that really reflects the real true relationship of a person and their animals.
I agree. And, you know, I think that fairly common knowledge out there that most of us do think of our pets as family. And in preparing for this episode, this interview today, I looked up on the internet, you know, the source of all sources, and I saw, according to Forbes Advisor, which is a very legitimate source, and they talk about a lot of statistics related to business and things. But what they had stated is that nearly all pet owners, in fact, and see, we use the word pet owners there, or they did, in fact, 97% consider their pets to be part of their family. And furthermore, Kathy, the Forbes Advisor survey of 10,000 dog owners found that dog owners make professional, financial, and lifestyle sacrifices for their canine companions.
Yeah, I fit right into that category.
Oh, yeah.
Sure.
Yeah, we all do.
Sure.
And I also found it interesting to see what, you know, kinds of sacrifices that they made. And by and large, the biggest was tightening their budget. 40%, almost 40% said that they tightened their budget to be able to afford their dog's expenses. 14% moved from an apartment to a house so their dog would have a yard. 7.5% stayed at a job they disliked because it allowed them to work remotely and had a dog-friendly office. So I think there are many more statistics they listed, but I think this is a perfect segue to talk a little bit about Erika Sinner and her mission.
In my mind, I think some people are closer to their animals than they are any other living human on the planet.
And you say closer, it's a different relationship.
Right.
But it's a deep relationship. So, you know, Erika, our guest, is going to focus on grieving our pets and her journey, her story. So a little bit about her. She is a dog mom of 3 shar-peis, who are the stars of the Instagram account at Crazy for Pay. Her book, her new book that's about to be released, is called Pets Are Family, centered around the passing of her dog Kingston in the summer of 2023 and her other dog Edmund's cancer diagnosis that followed just a few weeks later. The book delves into the intense grief of pet loss and the deep emotional connection we all share with our animal companions. This grief-inspired journey led her to lead more vulnerably as the CEO of her company, Directory, and advocate for pet bereavement leave in organizations. In fact, she is known to her colleagues as CEO or Chief Empathy Officer. Her book, Pets Are Family, serves as a first step in raising awareness about the necessity of such leave. Erika's book is not merely a personal account, but a call to action. Her mission extends beyond policy updates. It's about bringing more empathy into the workplace, recognizing the shared human experiences that unite us all. Welcome to Petability, Erika Sinner.
Welcome, Erika.
Thank you so much for having me. I am so honored to be here.
I think I would like to share this little thing I found on your Instagram account, that pets are family, and it's as simple as that. Once you accept this to be truth, when you lose a pet, the grieving, the pain, and taking time off from work all makes sense. If others accepted this to be true, then our societal norms of how we handle loss would apply and be more easily understood. I think that's great.
I love that you called it out. I think that was part of the inspiration behind my book. Is what I realized is going through the grief and finally really taking the time to acknowledge and validate myself that this is really hard and I needed to see a therapist and seek right support. I had lost a loved one. I had lost a family member that I saw every single day that I considered my son. That is a valid reason to go to therapy and to talk it through and to not feel shame. And when I did do that, I think walking through the steps of grief and really learning more about all of the steps and how they don't come in order, and that grief is very patient and it'll get you some days and other days you're okay. That's when I really learned truly that it is the same as a human being. And I think one of you said it as you were opening, we have a different relationship with our animals. I truly believe I saw it somewhere online, that is said, you allow pets into parts of your heart you would never trust any human being to be in. And I think that that's very true. And every animal has their own unique soul. And so when you lose one, and it is pain, it is grief, it is loss, and to me, it's how do we help everyone understand that you shouldn't have to feel shame. If you would never feel ashamed to say, hey, I can't come into work today, my insert family member just passed, everyone would understand. Yet there's this oddness around it being your pet.
Erika, there is actually a term for that. It's called disenfranchised grief. The simplest term meaning that it's perceived as less than another type of grief, like a grief of loss of your grandmother or the grief of loss of another family member. And there's all levels of grief too, because when our pets if they're diagnosed with something that is terminal, we can also experience anticipatory grief. So those are all normal things. And I'm hoping that we can, through our podcast and your book, normalize or let people know that those are normal feelings. And it's okay to ask for help because it's really hard.
I did not realize those terms. Like, I'm a CEO of an organization. I am not a therapist. I'm not a psychologist. My book really is a reflection of my own journey I've been through. And it's really around helping those going through it to know it's real and you can seek help and you shouldn't feel shame. I myself felt shame. And then also for those who don't understand it, I broke my book into 5 different parts. And the very first part is for those who don't understand it. And it's really to walk them through, here's parts of my life that I'm going to share with you, a very open, personal, historical view of my life in a very short chapter that I get very vulnerable to just say, if you can read through some of these stories and see, I really have had hard times in my life. And when I tell you that this is the hardest thing I've ever been through, by reading part 1, I would hope that you would be like, okay, I'm with you. I can at least understand the weight of what you're feeling. And then when you go to part 2, if you really still are like, now how does this apply to pets? I would hope that by the end of part 2, that they would fall in love with our family and understand, these are your kids, and I don't have to say fur before them. I can just say, these are my kids. I love them. But it is interesting to me just to think about just how families are perceived today. And I loved hearing the Forbes, percentages around who thinks pets are their families members. I think that is true. And I think we all are so comfortable sharing the funny stories, or when we get a puppy, or look what they did today, or they ate my shoe, or whatever it is. And yet when they pass, here they are, such a main part of your life, and we feel shame to reach out and talk to each other about the pain that we're in.
We talked a little bit before we came on the show and got to know each other a bit. And I shared with you how instantly gripped I was as I started reading the very first part of the book, the very first sentence, the very first paragraph. And your utter vulnerability just affected me emotionally. And I wanted to read more. I wanted to know where this is going. I would encourage, you people out there that are interested and struggling with different things to really appreciate that Erika, put herself in a place where she could be challenged, she could be hurt, and is just spoke with such a rawness and an authenticity that I think it's going to be a hit. I think it's going to be make Oprah's bestseller list.
Her book club, yes.
Yes, her book club. And we kidded Erika, that she's going to remember the little people like us here on Petability. Don't forget Kathy and Chris. But you started mentioning the first two parts. Then what does it lead to, Erika? You said 5 parts. What are the 3, 4, and 5?
Absolutely. Yeah. And Chris, thank you for saying that. I can't tell you how much it means to me. It is a risk to open yourself up in this way, in terms of just everything I'm about to share about my life. I think for me, though, and we can talk about it later in the podcast too, I feel a responsibility to do this work, and for a variety of reasons. But my book, it is in 5 parts. The first is to really just say to you, how can it possibly be that she's a CEO? She probably has a cush life. Like, of course, this probably is the thing that brought her down. But really, part 1 is more about, no, let me tell you about my hardships. Let me tell you, I grew up on food stamps. I have been through very hard times, and I'm still sitting here today saying this is the hardest thing I've ever been through. And then part 2 is, let me now allow you to come into my life and fall in love with my family and start to really see why these animals, I consider them my family. And I say in the first part, I hope everyone reads my book, my whole book. I poured my heart and soul into it. But if you're already there, if you're a grieving pet parent, and you're like, I don't need to be convinced, I don't need to be, that I'm hurting, that's part 3. Part 3 talks about when you are in it. It's when Kingston was diagnosed. It's how I was feeling. It's what every day was like. It was, I couldn't get out of bed. Part 3 is you are in it, and now you're being validated that all of the thoughts racing through your head are real. Everything you're thinking about is real. I mean, I talk about it in my book. I was trying to push the grief down so much that I was just like, I'll just work harder. I'll exercise more. I'll do other things. And your body will eventually will say, time out, no more. But that's part 3. And then part 4 is, if you've already gone through it, part 3 is really just to say this really was trauma, and this is really hard. And I want you to know that as a reader. But by the time you get to part 4, that's my healing journey. That is me accepting my emotions are real. That is me saying I honor my emotions, and here's how I did it. Here's the type of help that I seeked. If you break your arm, everyone's like, yeah, go to a doctor, you get a cast. But mental health, I think, is a topic that is hard to talk about, but your brain still is an organ, and it's still, responsible for a lot of things going on in your body. And so it is completely acceptable to go to your primary care, to see a therapist. So I talk a lot about both of those, but I also talk about in part 4 how the grief was affecting my whole family, including not just my husband, but my other dogs, my other shar-peis. And there was this moment that we realized we had to start showing up for them, and even taking them for a walk, and all of us really reminding ourselves what it felt like to feel joy, even if it is a little bit at a time or an hour at a time, even if we're grieving. And so it's those types of little reminders that really helped us heal, is all part 4 is about. And at the end of part 4, I have a love letter that I've written to all of the readers that have made it through my book and through my story. And then part 5 is, that's the resources. So when you opened my bio, you said there's a call to action. That is just who I am. I think a lot of people can get on board with how hard it is when you lose a pet, when somebody's open to talking about it. And then you see the emotion on their face, and all of a sudden you think about your own pet, and you're like, oh my God, I can only understand. I can only imagine how you're feeling. You go home, you hug your pet a little tighter, which maybe it's not a dog, maybe it's a cat, maybe it's a rabbit, but you're grateful. But no one's talking about, so what do we do? Like, how do we get ahead of, not, you're still going to feel the grief, but how do we provide support systems for each other, whether it be pet bereavement policies, even if it's a single day. I think that shows organizations to their employees, it signals to them, we understand you have a life outside of work and you're not just your job title, and we know you're hurting. This is not a PTO day where you're going to come back refreshed the next day. This is real, and this is bereavement leave. That's one way that I'm championing that as an employer, if I can do it. And as a small company, I'm calling out, the big companies that, all of us can do this. And then the second part, I think, is you mentioned my kids' Instagram account. They have 40,000 followers. They're all around the world. And in part 4, I talk about the healing. It was really opening up to other people and talking about it. I feel so lucky that for me, not only did I have PEP bereavement leave in my policies because I own my own company, but at 2 o'clock in the morning, when I was still grieving and crying, and I was not in my bed because I didn't want to wake up my husband, I'm like crying in my closet, but I can be on my phone and I can get into my Instagram account, and somebody in Russia or South Africa or Australia who's on a different time zone, at any time, I have hundreds of direct messages or hundreds of comments. There was someone there to talk to me, to help me feel seen and validated, and tell me they loved him too, even though they never met him. Every time, we would have Edmund's surgery or radiation, and I was worried, people would send us the little turtle signal, which is, if once you read the book, you'll understand why turtles are so important. But that is why I feel such a responsibility. I feel like I am so fortunate that I own my own company. So I could take off work. I also feel so fortunate I have this community online that was there for me always. I can't imagine what the weight would feel like if I was an employee who didn't have the time to take off because there's no bereavement policy. And I also can't imagine those who don't feel comfortable enough to share with any of their family or friends of what they're going through. I don't think I could have made it without both of those things. And that's why I feel so passionate about talking about it. We can't normalize something if we don't talk about it.
First of all, how great would it feel to have your boss just sort of acknowledge, I know you're having a hard time. It's okay to take a day off. But I would also feel more connected to that company. If I'm going to work and I'm grieving and I'm a mess, I may not put out my best work, but if I know that my employer is looking out for me, cares about me as an individual and not just a number in their company, I'm capable of doing extraordinary things when I'm feeling, appreciated.
So part 5 has resources for yourself as an individual to go to your company and say, hey, I have an email typed up of here's the email you could even send HR. Here's talking points you could use with HR. And even for HR, they're going to have to take it to their executive teams and get buy-in. And so I've got FAQs for them. And I've referenced SHRM, which is like the governing body of human resources, industry agnostic. So I have those. And then I also have resources for companies around even just basic training for how do you welcome somebody back in who is grieving, right? Like it's not, even when you have a day off for PEP bereavement leave, even for myself, where all of my employees know my dogs are my kids, I have PEP bereavement leave, I am taking time off. When I came back, there were some misunderstandings, I would say, or awkward meetings where they either just pretended it didn't happen, or they didn't ask, or they didn't want to send a text because they just, after talking through it, they're like, you just didn't know. Do you do that for a dog? Like I would say my condolences, or I'm so sorry, or who can I donate to, or is there a fund, or do you do a meal train for someone when they've lost a family member? But what do you really do for a dog? It wasn't that they didn't care, it was more they just didn't know. And so when you opened and read that piece from my Instagram, that's where I had just said, it's whatever you would do for a family member. It's the same. However you would have showed up for me if I had lost a family member, it would be the same.
And Erika, good for you for, taking the bull by the horns. And, like you said, you're lucky. You acknowledge that you're lucky to have the platform, in terms of your Instagram account, your followers, the community, but also the resources and the drive to move forward with this book and provide it to the masses. And also you have a website that's being developed that has similar information.
The website, I created it myself. So normally there would be a team of people who do this for myself and for my clients. But yes, I am trying. At the beginning, before my book was ready, I just wanted to get something out there for anyone else who was feeling what I was feeling. And we were making a lot of trips to the University of Illinois for Edmond, which is 3.5 hours away. So when we would do a day trip of 7 hours, we'd have to stay the night, we'd have surgery. I had a lot of time to try to figure out how am I going to help myself feel better. And part of that was building that website. And even in the very opening, I'm like, if you find typos in the website, I'm not a developer. I truly, this is just coming from the heart that I just want these resources to be available to you. And I've broken them out into here's for pet parents, here's for if you want to try to get it onto your organizational policies. I have in my book already ready the veterinary resources. I just haven't been able to get them on the website yet. And then I have the friend support. I think that's also important. If you don't have time to read the book and you're just like, I know somebody who just lost their dog and I don't know what to do, but I can tell they're hurting. There's two different documents there. One is here's just text messages, here's phone calls, here's things you could do to show up for them without spending a single penny. If you did want to send them something, here's another document of here's the things that we received and how we felt about them and the things that we will cherish for the rest of our lives, just to give you some ideas. That I thought, again, as a person of action, it's just leading by example. And if you can let people into your life, then maybe this will help somebody else.
When I was thinking about the veterinary clinic support, both Kathy and I, we really treat a lot of elderly and sick animals that, even though we do physical rehabilitation, they may have comorbidities that, ultimately will lead to their passing. And I hate writing grief cards and texts and emails just because it means that that pet is gone and and I become very close to my patients as well. And some of my very best friends are the pet parents of said patients. We get so close with them. And so both, I could utilize the resources for family and friends, as well as, the clinical support aspect from the veterinary side.
In veterinary medicine, we struggle or suffer from a lot of secondary trauma because we've seen a lot of our patients who we love so dearly and have worked so closely with and have seen them through so many things pass. So it's for everyone. It's not just for the pet owner, but it's also for the veterinary technician and for the rehab team and for the veterinarian and anybody else who was friends with the client who had the dog. They could all benefit from that information.
When I think about veterinarians, when I think about vet practices, it is, and what we observed in terms of like the front desk at U of I, when families couldn't afford care and the way they treated the front desk and why is this so expensive? And there's just so many facets that I can't imagine. This role is what you just said. Like, it's not a pediatrician where your patient's going to grow up to be 18 and then they're going to move on to a primary care professional. You're not a surgeon only. You're everything. You're everything, and your patient's lifespans are shorter, and you are connected to the parents of the pet. You're going to watch their whole cycle happen. And the cost, yes, there is a cost, but it's still not as much as it is for humans. And so the resources that I wanted to provide, I just feel like there's such a weight on the responsibility for veterinary clinics that we're asking them to have more compassion and, think about when are you going to send that invoice for, helping their pet transition over. Mine got sent in the middle of the day and like my heart stopped and I started crying in the middle of a meeting. And it's not their fault, right? Like, these are things that you're like, oh my gosh, if somebody just drew attention to it, maybe would have paid for that prior to it happening so that it's taken care of. Thinking about, here's a discussion guide we make them for humans. Here's a discussion guide of how you can talk to your patients coming in. Here's a toolkit that they can think about as, do they want to have it at home? Do they want to do the transition in the office? If it's in the office, do you want them to come in the front door? Even your office manager, knowing that that's on the calendar that day and knowing it's at 2 p.m. So now you come in, that you're at 2 p.m. It's not this big happy, welcome to the clinic. And what are you here for? Are you here for pet boarding? Or are you here for grooming? Or what are you here for? And you're asking this person to say, no, I'm here to put my dog to sleep. There's just these little easy things that I think if we just drew attention to them and veterinary practices could incorporate them, I think compassion on both ends for them and for their patients can happen by the tools that are in the book and that'll eventually be on the website, while still acknowledging I only made them not in critique, but in trying to support, because I can't imagine where they would find the time to do this, right? Like you already have so much on your shoulders.
There's a practice I used to work for, and when I signed on there, it was probably like 92, 93. And they had a special, I'm going to call it bereavement / euthanasia room. So there was no cold table. There was no sterile equipment. It was this nice blue calming room with a couch and a blanket that you could sit on with your pet. And in that time, it was sort of groundbreaking. No one had such a thing. And I think things are slowly changing like that and realizing that sometimes it's better to euthanize a pet at home. Or if we are going to do it in the office, how can we do that to minimize the stresses for the client and for the animal? And how can we keep them together through the entire process without being disturbed or interrupted with laughter, or you're right, new clients coming in or somebody, knocking on the door?
Yeah, I mean, for us, we chose at home. It was before I learned of Lap of Love, which now I'm in love with what they do too. But our veterinarian came to our home, and I am just A type. So I'm like, what are all the things I have to think about? And I text my neighbor, please don't let your dog out, because our dogs are friends. And so they like to run the fence line.
Yeah.
But we also put a note on our door where to FedEx, UPS, anyone. I was like, if it requires signature, and I was blunt in the note, like, my vet is here putting my dog to sleep. Like, if you need a signature, just come back tomorrow, or if you're not willing to leave the package. And they actually, there was like 3 packages out there that day. So I want to hug whoever, FedEx and UPS for following it, even if they probably weren't supposed to, if they needed the signature. But even practical things like that you aren't thinking about, but as a human being, usually we do think about funerals. A lot of people have them planned in advance, and there's a process if you don't, and there's questions that you're asked if you don't, and there's a way that you can go through that. But it just felt like for parents, there was more that we could do.
I love that you're also addressing ways to memorialize, because I think that's really important. And I had a patient not that long ago, this sassy little Keishond, and oh God, he was so he was so sassy, but I instantly loved him. Like we just got each other. And he was doing so well in rehab, and things were moving along really nicely. And he was walking more and playing with his friends and doing all the things that he loved to do, being a sassy guy. And then he was diagnosed with liver cancer. And he got so sick, I could almost cry now thinking about it. He got so sick so fast, and they ended up euthanizing him at home. And they had a celebration of life party not that long after that, and I was invited. And at first I was like, oh no, this is just going to kill me. It's just going to kill me. But it didn't. It was so great to see all the things and the people and the animals that he loved. Watching the slideshow of him when he was a puppy and sharing stories with other people who loved him. And everything there was something he had touched. And it was really beautiful. And it just made me feel a part of his life, that I made a contribution, but also just to be able to be there with his family and say, you know what, I loved your dog too. Thank you for inviting me.
Yes.
I think Kathy might cry on this podcast, Chris.
Wow.
I don't usually cry on podcasts.
No, you don't. I cried on our last podcast. You know what, Kathy? People appreciated that. People came up to me and they're like, you cried
I know.
on the podcast. I'm like, yes, I did.
And they're just some patients that you connect with on, I mean, I love all of them, but there are some of them that just you connect with and they get you, and it's just great. And you miss them,
Oh my gosh, Kathy, it's so same. I'm like over here wiping tears. But what you just said there too, I wrote about that in my book in terms of when you just said there's some of them that you just get. I talk a lot about Kingston is not the first dog that I have lost. I lost my Muttley, who I had for 19 years. She grew up with me. And she passed on a Friday, so I had the weekend before I had to go back to work. And I still talk about how Kingston is really who ignited me to move in this mission. And I recognize I was in a different phase of my life. At the same time, I also believe every one of our animals does have a different unique soul, a different personality, a different way of being, a different way of whether they're cuddly with you or they follow you around or they're super, like they have zoomies every day at 6 a.m. or whatever it is, right? Like you fall in love with each one of them so individually in the same way that as human beings, you have some relationships that are just meant to be forever. Months could pass and you're still best friends when you're talking. And then you have other relationships where you care about them, you want them to do well, but they're just not the same as these other relationships. And I think that can be true for animals too. I think I wanted to normalize that as well, because I feel like there may be pet parents out there that have multiple pets, and maybe their first one, they came back to work, and then maybe their second one, they're having a really hard time, and everyone at work might be like, well, what's your problem? Like, you were
Right.
fine before. And it's who is anyone to judge, right? Like, at the end of the day, I think it's just being vulnerable, and we're all human after all, you know?
Right. Right.
That's so interesting that you brought that up, Erica, because I just had lunch with a friend yesterday. And over lunch, we were talking about the relationships that we've had with, or have currently, with our dogs.
Mhm.
And, we were talking like, which one's your heart dog? Which one, for me, everybody knows it was Dagny. I have two Cavaliers now. I
Oh,
love them dearly, but I'm not as close. She impacted me at my core. And there were just so many unique and special things about her. And so, yes, and you're right. I do feel, having these two at my feet now, as we're talking, feel a little guilty about that, but that's natural. You're going to have different relationships, and they're going to impact you in different ways. And so I'm glad you're bringing all of this to light, all of your personal reflections and pragmatic things like the UPS. I was just like, huh, that is really practical, so you're bringing up all of these things that are so meaningful, on a practical sense and on an emotional sense. And, when you're talking about like part 4 in your healing journey, and you said, you tried to exercise and all of that, and your body will tell you to stop, the mental and the physical are so intertwined, whether it's in health and wellness or vice versa.
I threw myself into work, and I threw myself into working out. I love hot yoga. I will always be grateful for them for how they treated me the day that I showed up. I think it was like day 11 or 12 that I was pushing through. And that day I like projectile vomited at my yoga class. And I was so embarrassed, and it's never happened before. I go all of the time. It's not because it's hot in there. And I came home, and I just took a shower, and I got in bed, and I looked at my husband, and I was like, I can't do meetings. I'm not functioning. Something's really wrong. But when I talked to my therapist, she said, do you know, it's exactly what you just said. She said, your emotions and your body are so connected. And she's like, that is a very normal, natural response. And I was like, you've got to be kidding me. Like, vomiting? Like, I can't, I need to run a company. Like, my employees are not going to understand. They're going to be like, is she like, can't she just get it together? Like, or how can I trust myself that if I can't keep control of my body? And she said, you need to be processing the emotion. The shaking, the crying, the anxiety, the racing thoughts, even projectile vomiting, all of it. You will have very real physical responses when you're not addressing your own emotional well-being. And I think you don't address it when you feel shame, that you think something's wrong with you, that it's like you're thinking it's not supposed to hurt this bad, and yet here you are. And for me, I think I'm lucky that I work in the healthcare industry and felt confident enough to go to my primary care physician. But even when I met with them, and I consider myself a stable person. I've been going to them for many years. They know me. And here I am shaking and telling them, and they're like, what's going on in your life? And I tell them my dog passed. And I could see it in their face, and you could watch the wheels kind of turning of this is a stable individual. How am I going to respond to this? And you're coming in here to see me, right? Like, they were trying to weight the situation of, am I clinically depressed, or like, is this grief, or like even trying to, how are they going to manage me? The conversation was very interesting, and I talk about that in my book too. And I did never say it to them, but in my book, I had said, like, I wondered if I would have come in and said, my human son passed.
Mhm.
What would you have said to me then, right? Like, would it have been different? And at least and I wonder for others, right? For me, I am very comfortable with just pushing back and saying, like, no, this is real. This is serious. These are the types of thoughts that I'm having. I would like a plan. Like, what do you think? I'm throwing up in hot yoga. Something is wrong here. And I think that is your body signaling to you, like you need to get help. You need to do something. And I don't think it's just I think everyone has this. So if you would allow me to tell you just a very short story, this year I made a new friend. He is a psychiatrist who is Harvard trained, and this is what he does for a living. He's a psychiatrist and has patients. And he reached out on Instagram and sent me a note and said, I just wanted you to know it means a lot, the work that you are doing now. I have always followed your account because I also have a fellow shar-peis, and now my mind has just passed. And here I am as a trained psychiatrist, and I am not clear on what to do with myself this week. Do you have any
Wow.
advice? And I was floored. And I wrote back, and now we talk on the phone, and he's willing to do some interviews with me. We just did one last week together because I told him, I said, you can really add credibility to this. Like me, from an employer standpoint, is trying to get a policy in black and white. You are a clinical psychiatrist saying, I would think the general public probably thinks you would have this figured out. Like you would know what to do with yourself, but you don't. Like you're still a human being and you're still figuring it out. And grief is so different for everyone. And for him too, he said, I had shame in telling my own colleagues I'm struggling. That for me was like, it was just everything I needed to hear for myself too, of
Yeah, to validate your journey.
yes, yes. So even for my book signing that's coming up, I'm having my first one here in St. Louis. There's a Stanford psychologist who's going to fly in, and we're going to have a panel presentation around. I don't want it just to be about my book. My book is really me just putting my heart out into the world, that if you think as I'm talking, or if I'm talking to you, or if anybody's hearing and you're kind of rolling your eyes and saying it's just a dog, like I'm hoping you get the book and I can change your mind. But also for anyone who is really hurting, that you get the book and you're just like, I am validated. This is real. And like, I'm going to let you all the way in. But I really think it's important to add credibility to what we're talking about. And so I'm really excited for her to come. And I now am on a mission. Like, I got to do more of these. We got to go to more cities. We got to be having these conversations. We got to be telling people when they hear a psychologist from Stanford or a Harvard trained psychiatrist are both saying the same things. I don't know how you get, I don't know. I think that can really help normalize.
Are you planning to come to Boston? Because Harvard, is in Cambridge, right next door. And Kathy and I are both in the Boston area. So we would definitely love to see you, and we could take you out for dinner and discuss this further.
So I love this because I briefed on both of you before this podcast. And I knew that you were in Boston, and the majority of our clients are in Boston. So I'm out there about once a month. Well, maybe I'll just stay an extra day.
Yeah.
And do some things or some talks, or somehow we've got to figure out how to get to a broader audience. So yes, if already I will be calling you and saying,
That's
let's go to
awesome.
dinner.
One thing that I did want to expound on, I know you're really championing the bereavement policy around pets. Do you have any aspirations, or what are your thoughts on expanding that in terms of sick leave? You were caring for Edmund. You talked about it was, 7 hours, just the transportation, let alone the time for care. And you had to stay overnight, and that's time off work and all of that. And I know more and more companies are offering pet insurance to their employees as a benefit. Do you have any thoughts there as far as other types of employee benefits?
I really do. I think there's a lot more to think about for sure. In my first year coming out and talking about pet bereavement leave, I'm trying to keep it to the pet bereavement leave just so that I can get employers at the table. Sheryl Sandberg does a great job talking about bereavement leave. I think when she lost her husband, she took a month off. She's championing for that. I think she's championing for like 6 months off. Her materials are incredible. Her website's incredible. But for me, when I look at that from a person going through grief, I'm like, yes, I would want all of these things. And then when I look at it as an employer, I'm like, how can your company continue unless you're
Survive, yeah.
unless you're American Express or, Walmart. I don't know how I could do that. And so for me, just asking for a single day, I think starts to acknowledge the conversation. And I feel like employers, industry agnostic, you're not in the pet industry, but you can be any type of industry, can I get you to at least talk to me about a single day on your policy? I think starts to signal to your employees the beyond, right? Like I think about you as beyond your title, but it starts a movement and it starts a conversation. But I have seen, I mean, I've seen companies cover pet insurance. I've also seen paternity leave, like when you get a new dog, just like when you have a new baby.
Wow, I haven't
Yeah.
heard of that one.
I just heard, I saw it in a newsletter like a week ago, and now I'm like, wait a second, what? Like, because it's true, you have this little baby with shark teeth, and they need to go out every hour, and maybe you skip a
Absolutely.
day or two. I don't know, but it is true. I mean, my husband and I chose not to have human children. That was part of when we got married. This is the life we wanted to have. I think there's more families that are deciding that, and so. I do think an employment, as an employer, as a workforce, I do think we're going to have to start thinking more about those types of benefits because the way we think about families is changing and talent retention already is really hard. So these are really great ways to show someone you care about them.
I had a personal experience. I was a manager of a physical therapy sports medicine clinic on the people side when I was in Colorado. And, you know, you have to do these reviews, which I hate, and, you know, blah, blah, blah. And one of my colleagues shared with me that she said, just so you know, I probably won't be here tomorrow because my cat is having kittens.
Oh.
And she'd actually, so again, she was a PT like me, but she had taken some extra education as a veterinary technician, really got into breeding Egyptian Mao cats.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and she wanted to be there, you know, for the birth of these kittens and make sure everything turned out as well as it could.
Yes.
And I didn't know how to respond to her. Now, this was over 20 years ago. And, you know, I'm trying to think like, you know, again, as a middle manager, you know, what's the right thing to say? And what I said, Erika, is probably not appropriate at all. I just said, that's fine. But if this happens again, just don't tell me. Just take the day off. Because I was like, if anybody asked me, I'm like, oh yeah, she had to, you know, and again, it was there that kind of, is it appropriate?
No, I'm with you. I'm like, yes, will others understand that you let her take the day off, that she's not here? That, oh my gosh, it's such a great story. And even just how you responded, even though you allowed for it, right? Like I talk about that in my book too, where it's like, this is why I'm championing pet bereavement leave, because we can't just leave it up to chance that your middle management team will know what to do, right? If you have a policy, then it's just there and everyone does know what to do.
Right.
When that happens, I just got featured in HR Exec, which I'm so proud of that article because those are, you know, it's not just pet parents trying to go back to organizations. Like this is HR professionals have the power right now to have these conversations and make change. But there was a lot of comments underneath that where people talked about, I had the best manager who let me take time off. And then the next comment was, I didn't. And so I felt like I had to go back to work and I was crushed and I didn't know how to function. And everybody thought something was wrong. And I would just go cry in the bathroom and I would try to pull myself, get together and come back. But I really felt compelled, like I was supposed to come back to work and that no one would understand. And it's those situations where if you're not fortunate enough to have a relationship with your manager who would understand, that's what I'm really advocating for the pet bereavement leave, even a day.
And you know, and what I love too, Erika, this is a very different vantage point. I mean, on one hand, you know, pets are your family. It's that simple. You're a dog lover, but you are in a unique position as a CEO and having worn many, many hats in the, you know, pharma business side of things. And so you have a unique perspective, you know, at that intersection and how to marry those two seemingly divergent concepts or paths or whatever we want to describe it as.
When I talk about it in my interviews, when there's other companies, when they're like, but what if two dogs pass in a year? Then what do you do? Like, what happens if two family members pass in a year? Like, we could just keep going back to what are your current policies today? You know, bereavement leave is not legally required in all states in the United States. So for me, it's more about what is the culture you want to have in your organization? how do you want your employees to feel on Sunday night when they're coming into work on Monday? Or even if it's not a Monday to Friday, if you're a retail store, even then, there are still things that you could do, like a single day of pet bereavement leave, or train your managers in the same way people get smoke breaks. Go check on your employee who just lost their pet and let them have 15 minutes to go walk or just go away from the cash register and then they'll come back, right? There's ways that you can start to just creatively think about, how do I show up for my employees in a different way, regardless of whether you have salaried or hourly employees. And as myself as an employer, I understand the gravity of what I'm asking for. As an owner, you know what it costs when an employee is off, or what a PTO day costs to your own revenue. If you have clients, if you have all the things, but at the same time, when your employees come back, or if you don't give them a day, or Kathy, what you said, right? Like, people are more inclined to want to work harder for you if they feel like you care about them. If you don't do any of these things, if you're not giving them a space to breathe, if you're not showing to them that you care, even if you can't give them a day off, at least checking in on them. If you're not doing anything, you're hurting your own brand, because your customers, your clients are still going to be interacting with them, whether it's at a cash register or clients that are getting deliverables. That the way that they're engaging, the type of work, the quality of work is still going to be representative of your company as a whole. So you're either going to pay for it in, you don't have employee retention, or you're going to pay for it in terms of your brand as an organization. So regardless of what your incentive is to do it, there is incentive to do it. And I'm an employer, so like, we can talk about it. Let's talk about how we get it for it to work in your company, because we need more compassion. And we need more empathy. We just do.
I was looking back at these Forbes statistics, and further down on the list, as far as less percentage, like the whole pets as family, kind of thing. And we said, that 40% live on a tighter budget and so on. But as I'm going down the list, many took a pay cut or accepted a position with fewer benefits to work remotely or have access to a dog friendly office. So there may be room for compromise, right? So
Yeah.
if you offer pet bereavement, then maybe it's worth it. I mean, I'm not saying exploit employees, but maybe a slight, less salary, or yes, you can work, more hours at home, like a greater percentage at home versus having to be in the office. Or when you go to the office, you can bring your pet. 5% left a job because another company let them work from home and have a dog friendly office. And one thing before we wrap up here that I wanted to touch on, and it may be a bit controversial, many times we've talked about how you identify as a dog mom, and your dogs are kids. And I get that. But do you get pushback with this terminology? Because I know I have. And, I've had very, very dedicated dog owners that feel strongly about not anthropomorphizing their pets and treating them like children. Anyway, I'm just curious what your thoughts on this are, Erika.
It is controversial. However, for me, I am happy to talk about how I feel about it. I think I've made the decision. I'm just going to put the ideas and thoughts out there. And the more we all talk about it, the more it will shape society and where we will go. And then we'll figure out what is the right thing. I do call myself, I am their mom. Chris is their dad. Just this morning was Edmund's 6 months cancer recheck, and he's still cancer free. So
congratulations. What a relief.
Yes, thank you. But when they call you, they're like, "Oh, you're in the parking lot. So is this Edmund's owner?" And I'm like, "Yes, this is Edmund's mom." Like, no, I don't. I mean, it's not to me. I don't make it awkward. I don't try. And they'll still come back and like, "Great. So as an owner, can you please come in?" And I was like, "Yep, both of his parents are here. We'll be there in just a moment." Like, we just come in. I have found the same though in some of the interviews I've done in podcasts or in articles. I've gotten the same feedback where, I've even been told, don't call them pets. They're either your companion animal. And I just say, for me, these are my kids. I have a daughter, and now I have two sons instead of three. And I chose pets or family, and I kept it as pets because I think as a society, we can agree, we all know what pets are. So if you're on the spectrum of it's just a dog, you can see my book and say, oh, a pet, I understand what that book is. And if you're on the other side of the spectrum, where like you would never call them a pet, they are a companion animal or they're your kids, then you won't. But I'm trying to meet in the middle. I am just trying to get people at the table. And that means we can use terms that we both understand what they are. And part of the book also is about thinking about empathy and people's background. And, you don't know where people are coming from. Can you offer some grace? And rather than criticize, maybe you can educate, but also accept what other people are feeling. For me, this is my moment that mattered. Everyone will have different ones. There will be some, and like we said, there's sometimes you have different relationships with different animals that you have. And it's just about compassionate behavior, I would say, with other human beings and really just showing up for each other. But I do say I'm their mom and Chris is their dad and these are my kids. And, at the end of the day, that the true heart of the matter is that we do believe they're family and that it's important that we acknowledge that it's really painful when they pass.
Because Kingston's transition and your journey with that, was your moment that mattered. Can you give us a little bit of insight into Kingston's personality and, maybe share a special memory with our audience?
Thank you for letting me tell you all about Kingston, even just shortly. Kingston was my golden nugget. He was our firstborn. Shar-Pei are very different than any other type of dog in terms of personality. They say they're like the cats of dogs. So he's not like a golden retriever. He wouldn't come for treats. He didn't come for, let's go play outside. Like he had to make a decision that he was going to want to do these things. And so I would say he was a little boss baby. We always said, you're our equal, Kingston. He would be on his pay patrol, looking out all of the windows. But the moment that I talk about with him in my book is that it took 2 weeks for him to warm up to us, which I was like, what is going on here? I've never seen this with the dog before. Do we make a mistake? Does he not love us? And it was that it's how Shar-Pei are bred. It's how their personalities are. And it was the 14-day mark. He crawled over and got in my lap and I just cried because he finally had picked me and said, like, I'm in. You're my mom. We're doing this. And if anything, I was just trying to get my tears to like not fall on him because the last thing I need is for this nugget to be like, I made a mistake. Who is this person?
That's very Shar-Pei. That actually tracks right on brand for them. And to be
Yes.
accepted by a Shar-Pei, the high honor.
He is such a light in my life. I talk about him all of the time. We have an altar for him. I have a picture of him I'm looking at right now. He's my little golden nugget, my little Kingston Marshall. But thank you for letting me share a little bit about him. I'm so happy I get to say his name and that he's on a book and that other people will know about him. I hope he's proud of me.
If you had to give one piece of advice to anyone in terms of how to show up, what would that one critical piece be?
I would say just acknowledge, whether it is a text, a card, dropping something off, sending something that just says, I know you're going through a really hard time and just know that I'm here. And you don't even have to respond to this message or call me back or text me back. It's just acknowledge that way people at least will feel supported. I think that is what showing up is just, do they feel supported? You're not trying to fix anyone or help them get through it faster. It's just acknowledging that this is a really hard time. And if you even can say their pet's name, I think that goes a long way, a really long way.
Erika, can you say both the title of your book, where people can get it, and also your website?
So my book is Pets Are Family. It's as simple as that. You Google it, you probably will also need to put my name, just Erika Sinner, Sinner, and you'll find it either on Amazon or on BookBaby. Both of them are selling paperbacks in color or in black and white or in Kindle's e-versions. And then my website is www.petsarefamily.info. So it's not .com, it's .info. And then my Instagram is Erika_Sinner. And I would love to connect with anyone. I respond to all my comments. It's actually been a lot of fun getting to know people and learning about their own furry family members that they have. And so I would love to connect.
And remind us about the your kids' Instagram. What's that handle again?
Yes, so crazy, the number 4, and then PEI, because shar-pei, they just sometimes you call them pay. And because I had 4, it was always crazy 4 pay, but also my 4 shar-pei. So
Love it. Love it. Love
yeah,
it.
we have a lot of fun on there. And today I posted the video of us going to Edmonds Cancer Free, and it's fun to celebrate those moments too.
Absolutely.
Well,
Thank you.
thank you, Erika. It was wonderful to meet you, and I hope that we get to talk again.
Yes, I get to see you in Boston. I will be
Yes,
calling you
yes.
guys. So we need to get together. There's so much to do. So much to do.
Your book is so necessary, and you're exposing your vulnerability, and this rawness is really going to connect, I think, with other pet owners. So thank you for writing this. I also want to encourage our listeners. We do have an interview with Dr. Becky Schoenberg from Autumn Care and Crossings on the show of pet bereavement and hospice. So, and she did a lovely job. So if you're interested in learning more about that, I would encourage you to listen to that show.
Thank you for joining us. We hope you enjoyed our show.
Follow us on social media at Petability Podcast.
And please check out our affiliates and sponsors.
Simply go to the show notes for information and links.
Thank you and tune in next time.